Arizona State coming off the bye this week, and they're faced with their toughest opponent yet in number 5 Washington for another last-ever Pac-12 matchup between these two teams. Nick Borgia, Devil's Digest, alongside our publisher Hode Urbino and Hode. The polar opposites between these two teams obviously reflected in the records. Washington 6-0, ASU 1-5. But aside from that, the vibe in Seattle right now around this Washington team that just took down Oregon in a super emotional win last week, I mean, they have all the energy and excitement around them in this week.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. And I think when you look at a team like Washington, a team that a lot of people thought that would do pretty well last year as well, ironically, Arizona State is the last team to beat them. But that win against Oregon puts them squarely in the driver's seat for the Pac-12 championship game. And obviously, as the number 5 team in the nation, they have legitimate aspirations to qualify for the college football playoffs, let alone have legitimate aspirations to win the national championship. The big question is, as much as they're on cloud 9 right now, is that going to be the element that's going to overcome the quote-unquote revenge factor that Washington has, again, trying to avenge that loss to Arizona State, the last team to beat them? Or is it really going to be just a matter of it's easy to overlook a team that has not even notched a Power 5 win to date, let alone a Pac-12 win? Is that really going to play a big factor with Washington? And you look at Arizona State, Nick, and it's really unfortunate that you think a bye week that can heal you mentally and physically didn't exactly do the work for the Sun Devils. Head coach Ken Dillingham talked about still significant injuries happening on the offensive line, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes on how that really can affect Saturday's game. And sure, Arizona State's a team that feels rested, rejuvenated to some extent. Again, I think the injury bug is still there and significant, so hard really to describe those conditions as ideal. But a team that truly wants to turn the page, have a much better second half of the season than they did the first one, and trying to do it against the best team in the Pac-12 and one of the best teams in the country might be pretty hard to accomplish. But like I said, Nick, absolutely polar opposites, not only in the records of both programs, but just also the general mood of both programs.
So when we look at this Washington offense, I mean, the only thing you can really do is just shake your head and be amazed. It's unbelievable. In a conference where explosive offenses really aren't all that uncommon, this team is on a different level. Washington averaging 44 points per game, 543 yards per game. It's just unbelievable. The ASU defense can have their hands full.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, you're not going to stop them. How can you even try to contain them? And I think if you take a page of, ironically, University of Arizona and see what they did against Washington, you look at what they did to Michael Penix, the very talented quarterback, and that Husky offense, and they really made him work for everything. They really had keep all the passing plays in front of them, really limit their explosives as much as possible. We're probably more careful, I should say, than usual in rushing the quarterback, really applying pressure, because the last thing you want to do is give this Washington offense, this passing offense, I should say, one-on-one matchups, because they have absolute elite group of wide receivers. Now, I'm not going to discount the running game, because I think even just last week, when you look at the Oregon contest, their running back transfer from Mississippi State, Dylan Johnson, definitely had a good game, and they definitely have something to showcase on the ground too. But I think if you're Arizona State, you're really going to drop as many people into coverage and just take your chances with that running game, because you don't want the passing game to beat you, or maybe not to beat you at a large extent, as Washington has done to many opponents this year and even last year, for that matter. I think the irony of that approach is, let's say you do have good success on first and second down. Here's Washington on a 3rd and 8. Usually, when your opponent has that down and distance, you're more compelled to rush the passer and take chances, and that's where Washington can hurt you. And Washington, much like a lot of teams in the Pac-12, is not shy at all going for it on 4th down, almost regardless of where they are in the field. So there's no doubt that this ASU defense definitely has its hands full. I know they did really well against a very explosive Colorado team right before the bye week, but the Washington offense, like I said, Nick, is an absolute on a much different level. It really is going to be quite a task. Again, I think the approach is take your chances with the run game and make sure with the passing game that you're not really exposed to explosives, and maybe, just maybe, you can somewhat contain this Husky offense.
So the struggles of the ASU offense have been well documented, but when you look at this Washington defense, I mean, it's almost overshadowed by the explosiveness of the offense. This defense is just as good, giving up 20 points per game. The ASU offense also going to have their hands full when it comes to facing the Husky defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really easy, like you said, to look at the offensive numbers and think that, okay, there must be some price to pay, so to speak, on defense, and maybe it's not the greatest effective unit out there. This is Washington defense that is almost old school in the sense of their defensive back unit is really, really strong. And anybody that watched the Washington program in the last few years know that they've really been DBU, if you will. Maybe not that great against the run, but against the pass, so that's a whole different story. And I think last year was really the opposite, but this year it's back to quote unquote normal in Seattle when it comes to their defense. They're third in pass defense efficiency. Already have 8 interceptions throughout 6 games, so obviously a very opportunistic pass defense. But when it comes to the run defense, I mean, it's really just middle of the pack, more or less. But the question is, how can Arizona State really run the ball effectively when their offensive line is still riddled with injuries? There's not really a whole lot of depth behind Cam Scatterbu. I know DeCarlos Brooks is trying to come back from injury. He did practice this week. We don't know how much he'll play, if he'll play on Saturday. But if Arizona State has any aspirations of trying to pull the upset, they're really going to have to make sure that their run game is on point. And let's face it, I mean, it really has been an area of struggle for the last couple of weeks for the Sun Devils. And you obviously always have that benefit, if not incentive, that the more you can run the ball, the more you can keep the opponent's offense off the field. And for obvious reasons, this is a Husky unit. You definitely want to limit their possessions as much as possible. So I'm curious to see if Arizona State's run game can really kick it up a notch compared to recent performances. Again, the depth at running back and really just the state of the offensive line is really going to make it very, very hard. Another incentive that this Arizona State offense should have is that Washington, even though they are a really good defensive unit, they're near last in the Pac-12 in third down defense. Now, obviously, when you have third and manageable, let alone third and short, I mean, sure, you can make that stat for Washington look quote-unquote normal, maybe even a little worse than it is right now. But again, that's going to require the ASU offense to really be on point with the running game. We talked about that upset win last year, Nick, and that was in some ways the breakout party for quarterback Trent Bourguet, who is going to be the starter again this week in Seattle. But people may forget that even though ASU put up 45 points in that afternoon, Trent Bourguet only had 183 yards passing. He was supported by a very, very good running game, and obviously a defense with a pick 6 by Jordan Clark, and a defense that really was able to make timely stops in really critical situations. But again, even an upset win last year, and the cast of characters, especially for Washington, is very, very similar to the game we saw here in Tempe just about a year ago. Trent Bourguet didn't go off and throw for over 300 yards or anything like that. And even though in his 2 full starts so far, Bourguet has thrown for over 300 yards, that the other side of the coin, and maybe the unpleasant other side of the coin, was the running game for Arizona State not producing big numbers, definitely not producing explosive plays. And to me, that's something that has to change if Arizona State really has any aspirations of pulling off an upset. So again, does this running game for the Sun Devils show up? That might be the key right there for any chances of Arizona State pulling another upset win against Washington.
So it's no surprise that ASU comes into this one as a heavy underdog. The last time they were a multiple touchdown underdog was when they hosted USC earlier in the year. And not only did ASU cover in that game, but they kept it pretty close throughout the majority of that contest. So now ASU's on the road this time around is a huge underdog. How do you see this one boiling down in Seattle on Saturday night?
Well, first, we're going to talk about the ASU on the road. Even though Cal is obviously light years of a program behind Washington right now, I did like the way that ASU showcased itself on the road against Cal. I mean, it still was a struggling season back then too. But I think that playing on the road, even though the environment is going to be much noisier than Cal and really than anything they've seen or heard in a long, long time. And we know the team was practicing in the bubble quite often this week to try to simulate that crowd noise. I think that ASU on paper can handle those elements quite well. The question is, when it comes really to the X's and O's, how can Arizona State really match up with Washington? And to me, and I know I mentioned it earlier, it's really just more of the mental approach of Washington. I mean, on the one hand, they have no reason to not come motivated playing against a team that last beat them. On the other hand, you can't deny that there's a lot of pep in the step right now for the Huskies, and for good reason. They absolutely earned it. But when does that confidence turn to cockiness, if ever? Because if it does, then Washington could be in some trouble. But ultimately, I think we just look at talent versus talent. This is a much better Washington team than it is an Arizona State squad. I know that coaches and players aren't looking for moral victories. If you're an ASU fan looking for a moral victory, maybe two things to keep in mind. A, I think Arizona State is going to cover the line. And B, no matter what happens on Saturday, Arizona State will still have the all-time record against Washington. And with Washington going to the Big Ten, who knows when those two teams are going to meet again. So I'm picking Washington to win 41-21.
Got it, Hode. Well, thank you so much for your insight. We'll be making the trip out to Seattle for this game, so make sure you keep it locked in at DevilsDigest.com and drop a follow at Devils Digest for all the best coverage surrounding this contest. For Nick Borgia, that's Hode Urbino. We thank you so much, and we will see you in Seattle on Saturday.